Hey everyone, Ian King here with your weekly Smart Profits Daily YouTube webinar. And joining me this week again, Steve Fernandez. Steve, how's it going?
Doing great.
Yeah, cool. So today we got something special for you. I want to talk about my favorite chart when it comes to technology investing. And it's probably not what you think. You know, when I say the word chart, you're probably thinking about a stock chart or the chart of a bond price. This is actually the chart of what's known as the Gartner hype cycle. Now, I want to pull this up on the screen for our viewers here. And what the Gartner hype cycle is it's basically a presentation that was developed by an American research firm named Gartner, and it explains the maturity, adoption, and the social applications of like different technologies. So it starts with what's known as the technology trigger, and that's there at the bottom left of the screen. And this could be something like the .com, the internet, or cryptocurrencies coming on the screen, and what happens is the hype around a new technology just increases exponentially, and then it gets to a point where it peaks, and the peak usually happens when everyone is just so bullish about the new technology and so convinced that it's just right around the corner. And you see this manifest itself in things like stock prices that go up exponentially, or prices of cryptocurrencies that go up. And when it peaks, then you have what's known in the stock market as a bear market, and people don't believe that the technology is right around the corner and they're sick of it. And then you get to the trough of disillusionment. But then at some point, you start to see real world adoption of the technology. And here comes the slope of enlightenment. And as an investor, this is where I like to invest. I like to invest when a new technology feels like it's gone by the wayside and people are doubting its future, because those are where the biggest gains are to be made. Now, Steve, let's give some real world examples of this. What is a great example of how this hype cycle has played out in a given technology?
Sure. So I think the most obvious one that comes to mind is the .com bubble. It was a little bit before my time, but from what I understand to be true, anybody with a .com in their company name, their stocks were soaring, and there was a huge crash. I think the Nasdaq may have been down 80% at one point, and people were starting to question whether the internet was a legitimate technology. I'd seen quotes where people had kind of bashed the people that created the internet or believed in it, and called them foolish essentially. But obviously, we know what the internet has done today and how our society has evolved. So, if you look at the hype cycle, obviously the .com bubble was that peak of inflated expectations. And the stock prices mirrored, the drop in the hype cycle to the trough of disillusionment. And, we kind of went 10 years or so where we had, social media, e-commerce, and these big picture trends, but we're really starting to see an acceleration in the internet now, especially when you consider like the evolution of cryptocurrency and the metaverse. So there's plenty of examples of the hype cycle playing out. What other types of technologies do you see that occurring in now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the most interesting one right now is electric vehicles. And so if you go back a couple of years ago, when Tesla first announced that they were going to have the Model 3 and that the car was at some point going to be, cheaper than gas guzzlers, it started to get a lot of people excited. Remember, we recommended Tesla for our readers at Strategic Fortunes way back in 2019. And, there was a mania around EVs where, anything that had to do with electric vehicles or battery makers just went bananas earlier this year. And then we sort of went into this bear market. But I believe now that we're starting to see us get out of the trough of disillusionment and back onto the slope of enlightenment. And I'm going to give you a couple of real world examples about this just for context. Now, number one, there are only 4% of cars in the world sold today are electric vehicles. And by the end of this decade, experts predict that it's going to be 50%. I think it's going to be more because I think that as soon as the value the cost rather of producing an EV becomes cheaper than a gas guzzler, it's just lights out for gas cars. I mean, why would you ever buy a car that's going to cost more in maintenance, cost more in fuel, and doesn't accelerate as quickly over buying an EV? So we're already seeing that demand start to occur. Ford sold 100,000 of its F-150 Lightnings, or at least got pre-orders for it in 3 weeks. The GMC Hummer electric vehicle sold out in 10 minutes. You've got Volkswagen ID4 selling, the Ford Mach-E, which is their electric vehicle. Ford Mustang Mach-E is now, the car and driver EV of the year. And Tesla's Model Y is sold out for like 6 months in the US and Canada. So these are just examples of this demand that we're starting to see in the electric vehicle market. Steve, what's your take on that?
I agree completely. Like you said, it doesn't really make sense to buy an internal combustion engine vehicle or a gas guzzler if you can get pretty much the same exact vehicle as an electric vehicle. Obviously, if it's cheaper per se to manufacture, it'll eventually be cheaper on the retail side as well for consumers to purchase. So performance specs have been better in the case of, say the Tesla. It's going to smoke a Ferrari, I believe. I think it's faster than a Ferrari. So Crazy. Just goes to show you that you don't have to sacrifice performance for an electric vehicle. So yeah, I think
these aren't your dad's old golf carts that we're talking about here.
Exactly.
And I would note one other thing too, is that for investors, I mean, so this market is 4% of total auto production right now, and then could be 50%, and I think much higher by 2030. I think it's going to be close to 90%. The other thing to keep in mind here is it's not just the auto companies that profit from it. It's all the components makers and suppliers and the other types of materials that go into these batteries. I mean, think about how big this market is. The EV market could be, at a minimum of $1 trillion a year by the end of this decade. That's just for cars. Now, the battery is 25% of the cost of the car. So you're talking about a $250 billion battery market. And then we got to talk about all the charging stations that are going to be popping up all around the world, right? So we're also going to be replacing our entire network of how we provide energy for cars now with charging stations, solar power, so this is going to accelerate more green energy trends as well, with also, the development of cheaper lithium ion batteries. So I think just all in a whole, it seems like all of these sort of new energy companies win out by the race to create a cheaper electric vehicle.
Sure. I think that the less obvious trades, kind of like you described, like the material type companies, I think those have the most upside, over the next decade or so. When you think about some of the valuations on the electric vehicle stocks, they're already pretty high. I mean, you have companies that have yet to produce a vehicle that are almost as expensive as, a Ford per se. So am I saying that those stocks won't do well? Not necessarily, but I think that the less obvious trades that have a long-term catalyst and should see steady growth, I think they have the most gain. So I know that we're really focused on that aspect. You were able to recommend Tesla in the past, and that one worked out really well. And obviously, I think we have our eyes set on a different subset of the market now. So yeah,
I think it's going to be a really exciting couple of years here with the rollout of all these new EVs. So Steve, let's leave it there. If you have any comments, if you want to tell us about your EV experience, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you like what we have to share with you today, go ahead and give us a like. It helps us get our information out to other YouTube viewers. For myself and Steve, I want to thank you all for tuning in. Have a great weekend. We will see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks again.